In the beginning, God created Texas. Maybe you expected me to say God created the heavens and the earth, but remember, there are lots of different creation stories involving lots of different gods. The creation story most people hereabouts believe right now is the one in the Bible, and since it's so popular, well, maybe it's true. This one, however, is not. It's one of those stories we call myths. They're not true because nobody believes them anymore. But we continue to study them because it gives college professors something to do. So anyway, God created Texas. Now this particular God's real name was Iwi, which translates to, "It is what it is." The name sounded good at first, but being omniscient, Iwi knew that this name would eventually become a trite phrase people used to express resignation at the inevitable. And he knew how annoying it would be to hear people utter that phrase time and again when they didn't have anything else to say. So he decided to go by plain old God instead. Now Iwi, or God, was an irascible old bastard of a god who thought windy deserts full of dust, cactuses, and rattlesnakes were just heavenly. He filled the place with coyotes, owls, skunks, possums, and longhorn cattle, and said, "Boy, howdy, this is one rip snortin', rootin', tootin' place, ain't it?" But, like lots of gods, Iwi, or God, decided at some point that he would like somebody to sacrifice one of those longhorn cattle every once in a while to honor him for his glory. In general, gods tend to be a bit insecure, despite their omnipotence. They seem to want people around to reassure them that they really are all that. So Iwi, or God, scooped up a pile of cow dung and shaped it into the first cowboy. He called that cowboy Lefty, mainly because he had two left arms. But it soon became obvious that Lefty would have a hard time finding shirts to fit, so one day God snuck up and cold-cocked Lefty with a rock, and then he pulled that extra left arm off. At this point, Iwi, or God, had a rare moment of compassion and tenderness and decided to create a cowgirl that Lefty could sing ballads for while he was sitting by the campfire on the range at night. He formed that extra left arm into the first cowgirl, and he called her Betty Sue. Now, as it turned out, though, when Lefty and Betty Sue got together, Iwi, or God, was pretty disappointed in them. That frequently happens in myth because if gods don't get angry at their people, there's not much of a story to tell. Also, you should bear in mind certain logistical facts regarding gods and the act of creation. Though gods originally created just about everything, they don't want to spend the rest of eternity just churning out new copies of the same old stuff. That's a lot of work, so they cleverly invented sex organs in order to delegate that onerous chore of procreation to the various animals, including humans. Now, Iwi, or God, wanted Texas to be chock full of little cowboys and little cowgirls just like Lefty and Betty Sue. He was counting on them to provide just that. But one day, a rattlesnake crept up to Betty Sue while she sat in the meager shade of a small mesquite to nurse the newest little cowboy in her brood. He flicked his forked tongue and looked at her through his hooded, elliptical eyes, and he said, "You know, Betty Sue, if you just slipped one of those little rubber things over Lefty's noodle whenever you crawl under the covers at night, you wouldn't have to get pregnant every time you did the dirty deed and spend the next 9 months waddling around all fat and cranky." The idea kind of excited Betty Sue and left her feeling a little breathless. "Really? We can do that?" "Sure, baby," the snake replied. Then he slithered off, looking for a rat to eat. "I wonder why Lefty never told me about those things," Betty Sue said as she plucked a condom from the mesquite tree and headed toward the ranch house. "Ooh, we're gonna have some fun tonight." Lefty was a little bit reluctant because, well, let's face it, nobody really likes to wear those things, and besides that, God had given him strict instructions not to. He distinctly remembered God's holy words. Lefty, I'm going to put a condom tree out here in the middle of this here paradise, but it's not for you, understand? Under no circumstances should you avail yourself of this oddly shaped fruit, or you'll die. But Betty Sue was mighty sweet and tempting, and it was hard to argue with her logic when she said, "Look, Lefty, we'll just use 'em when it's dark. That way God will never know." So that's what they did, and they got away with it for a while, until God happened to stop in for a visit one day, and he noticed a used condom in the trash can. "Oh, heck," Lefty said, for he knew the jig was up. "You just can't hide nothing from an omniscient God. I should have knowed better than to even try." "You got that right," God said. "Now you and Betty Sue are on my permanent shit list. Get off my land and don't you ever come back." So Lefty and Betty Sue moved up north of the Red River and vowed never to use condoms again. Together they spawned a whole race of rednecks, the descendants of whom are known to this day as Okies. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, there was a young cowboy named Dookie who married one of his sisters. Now the reason he married one of his sisters is obvious. Since Lefty was the first cowboy and Betty Sue was the first cowgirl, then all of the little cowboys and cowgirls in all of Texas were their children. Therefore, the only cowgirl alive who wasn't his sister was his mother, Betty Sue, and she was in Oklahoma. Anyway, Dookie married his sister Pamela, and things went okay for them until one day when it occurred to Pamela that Dookie might like her cooking a lot better if she could use the lean cuts of meat from the longhorn instead of the bones, gristle, and hair that was left over from the sacrifices they made to God every Sunday. So Pamela took it upon herself to pull a switch on God one day. She concealed all the steaks and other prime cuts under some hair to hide them from God. Then she packed the bones and gristle under some tasty-looking fat and gave that to Dookie, who burned it on the altar. God took a whiff and said, Fajitas." He thought they smelled great, but when he took a bite he realized what Pamela had done. It really hacked him off. "That tears it," he said angrily. "I'm not accepting any more animal sacrifices from you people. From now on, it's a cash-only business." Then he created a place called Mexico and went there to live. He liked it because they had a custom of taking naps in the middle of the day. Without God to check on the trash cans for used condoms every day, things in Texas went downhill in a hurry. People were having gratuitous sex, eating meat, and working on Sundays and Saturdays. When God finally woke up from one of his long siestas and realized what was going on, he was righteously pissed off. And then, when he noticed a cowhand wearing a polyester blend suit and cooking beans with bacon, he just snapped. He went from pissed off to implacable and decided to destroy all of Texas with a huge flash flood. Now, as it happens, the old talking rattlesnake, who was actually in cahoots with God on a lot of his plans, went up to Texas and warned Dookie of the upcoming storm. He said, "Listen, Dookie, I have some information that will save your life, but I'll only tell you if you promise to bring me along when all the shit starts." Well, Dookie agreed, and the deal was struck. In accordance with the snake's instructions, he built a great big boat, big enough for Dookie, Pamela, Ferdinand the bull, Elsie the cow, and a year's worth of hay. And the snake, of course. Dookie just barely finished the boat before the flood came. He brought the cows up from the barn and hollered at Pamela to hurry up and get 'em on board. Unfortunately, she took too long trying to get the last cuts of meat up the ramp, and the floodwaters washed her away. "Don't worry," the snake told Dookie. "With her gone, there'll be more food for us." Dookie wasn't exactly happy about that, but what could he do? They bobbed around on the waters for a good long time, and finally they made landfall at a place called Mount Bonnell. Dookie was glad to be back on solid ground, but he was lonely without Pamela. "Where will I find a woman?" he moaned. "Hey, lighten up," the snake told him. "You should head on down to the capital and see the oracle. He has a direct line to Iwi, or God. He'll help you out." So Dookie went on down Congress Avenue toward the dome. The street was amazingly dry. You could hardly tell there had been a flood. It was an awful long walk. Dookie wished he had a horse to ride. Finally he got to the Capitol and found the oracle standing proudly at the top of the Capitol building steps. His teeth and his hair were perfect. "Are you the oracle?" Dookie asked. "Yes, I am the oracle." "Do you know where I could get a horse?" The oracle smiled. "A horse, young man? A horse? These days only rodeo performers ride horses. Real cowboys, such as yourself, ride ATVs, SUVs, and diesel pickup trucks with dualies. You have to get with the times, son." Dookie was perplexed. He didn't understand the oracle's strange words, but the oracle was persuasive nonetheless. He was downright inspiring. He reached out and placed his hand on Dookie's head and began to pray. "O Lord, help this young man to do thy bidding. Help him to bring forth a new generation of God-fearing cowboys to make Texas the biggest place on earth. Hallelujah, Lord. Big guns, big oil, big banks, and big business. Holy, holy, holy." Suddenly Dookie felt the Spirit upon him. He began to babble and shout and fell to his knees, saying, "Yes, Lord, yes, just tell me what to do." And the oracle spoke. "Go forth, young man. Go forth and sow the land with the flesh of your father." It took Dookie a while to figure it out, but suddenly he knew what to do. He ran back to the boat and put a tether on Ferdinand and Elsie. He led them across the countryside, and wherever they dropped a patty, a new person sprang up. Cowboys from Ferdinand's droppings, and cowgirls from Elsie's. Wherever a new cowboy sprang up, there was a salesman with a contract for an SUV or a pickup, and a banker to give him a loan, and an insurance salesman, and a gun dealer, and a preacher to tell him how to live. And that, my friends, is the story of Texas and how it came to be the wonderful place that it is today.